Welcome back to As It Happens. I'm Mandisa Mashego from the Economic Freedom Fighters. I'm a member of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature, but tonight I'm doing something completely different. Joining me now on the program is the DA's Jack Bloom. He's the Health Shadow MEC in Gauteng. Welcome, Jack, and thanks for making it to the program tonight.
Good evening.
I hope you will correctly advise Herman Mashaba not to even consider the current claim for 300 million rand to be paid to an alleged landowner in Lenasia, which has been running on eNCA tonight.
Well, I don't know the full circumstances of it, and I'm sure our mayor in Johannesburg will take the right decision. I think he's doing a good job, and I'm sure he'll consider all the factors.
And of course, over and above that, you do know that the the EFF will very strongly oppose the suggestion that those residents who occupied that vacant land must be relocated.
Well, we know your position, and you must put it to the mayor. And I think we've got to balance things here, and I'm sure the right decision will be taken.
You know, Jack, the reason I'm raising this is because of the current topic, in Parliament and in the country seizing us of land expropriation without compensation and the need to amend the Constitution. This instance in Lenasia is a typical example of why, as the EFF, we are resolute and sticking to our guns on this issue, because alleged landowners constantly claim that they own land, and when they go to government, they demand huge amounts of money to be paid back for that land, which has been lying fallow in most cases. So, noting that obviously the DA did not support that motion, I hope that in practice that this particular instance indicates to all of us, including the DA, the need for this land expropriation amendment process of Section 25 of the Constitution to be supported by, of course, the majority of us in the country. I'd like to get your point, your viewpoint on this.
As you know, the DA is in defense of the Constitution, and we think that Section 25 hasn't been fully applied, and that this ANC government, because of corruption and bad people, because there's a lot of corruption and mismanagement and all that, and they put very little money aside for land redistribution. You know, if they'd only not wasted money on SAA, for instance, I mean, unbelievable figures, 20 billion rand plus has just been lost on SAA alone, or the other looting that goes on. Minister Pravin Gordhan said that the loss is something like 100 billion rand. If you'd put a portion of that into land redistribution, we could have made a lot of progress under the existing constitutional clause.
But Jack, you would agree with me that the state has currently spent over 30 billion rand already on land restitution programs. And very little, I mean, one land restitution claim cost the state 1 billion rand. And to this day, we see very little evidence of the success of that program where compensation is, under the current regime. So, but I'd like for us to move on to a subject which I think you would probably be very excited about, but to really discuss the current crisis of public health care. But first and foremost, we need to agree, Jack, or rather, you need to give us your views about the EFF's demand for 24-hour clinics, specifically here in Gauteng and of course across the country.
Look, it's very important that we have access to our clinics. I think it's absolutely terrible. People have to take a day off work. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, then they can go to the clinic and be in the queue all day, and they might have to come the next day. That's absolutely inexcusable. And as you know, Mayor Herman Mashaba has added to the number of 24-hour clinics in Johannesburg, and I think it's a valid demand. I mean, but obviously you've got to look at the budget and how you do it, and which clinics are 24 hours. You know, they've got to have a casualty. They've got to be properly resourced clinics. So there's staffing issues, but definitely I fully agree with you. Why must people take a day off work just to get a bit of medicine or see a doctor?
Well, of course, so because you agree on the fact that we need the 24-hour clinics, especially because the capacity in the provincial and other regional hospitals is just so low, you'll probably further agree with the EFF that all the privatized ambulance services that are supposed to support clinics and hospitals in emergency cases must be stopped. primarily because very often ambulance services leave, especially our black communities, literally in the lurch, and sometimes patients end up arriving at the hospitals having lost their lives.
Mandisa, look, I absolutely agree. We've got a terrible public ambulance service, and I think we need to fix up the public ambulance service. And you need to ask yourself, why haven't we been able to do that? But, private ambulance services fulfill a very valuable role. And as you know, I've been a constant critic of the terrible ambulance service in Gauteng. Why can't we get it right? There's mismanagement. As you know, they keep buying new ambulances, but these ambulances are never on the road. They're in workshops.
But I would find it very strange, Jack, if you pardon my interrupting. I find it extremely strange that you would support a private, ambulance service, and yet you are the most vocal in the legislature about the unnecessarily expensive costs of delivering public health care to the poor.
I think that a public health system can commission private services, and I think that
and
can
in
work.
the process, there's markup costs?
In a non-corrupt way, open tender. But as you and I know, every time something goes out for a tender, it's corrupt, and somebody adds on.
But even if there was no corruption, there would be increased costs, and those increased costs compromise all other basic services that the state must offer.
I think we need to see where the increased cost is. If a private service can be done more efficiently at a better cost.
So are you saying you believe that private ambulance services could actually be delivered at a lesser cost than what the state could do it directly?
Well, at the moment,
efficiently?
the state is doing it terribly. So if we can get a private contractor to do a better job.
It's not working out in practice. The private ambulance service providers are actually not going to townships on time, sometimes often not even responding. I mean, I had to intervene on a case recently that went, viral on Twitter, where a woman who was in dire straits had waited for an ambulance service for over 12 hours.
Why are you criticizing a private ambulance service when we're supposed to have a public ambulance service? The only reason we have private ambulance service is because the public service is so deplorable. That's the problem. I think, why can't we fix the public ambulance service? That's the question.
Well, that's exactly my point. But perhaps we need to move on. But at least let's agree on one thing. The 24-hour clinics are absolute necessity, but privatization of services increases the cost of the state to deliver quality. Of course, we agree under the current government. Corruption is almost inevitable, and efficiency is something that the ANC cannot even relate to.
But why did we cost it? I think that if you commission a private service, you can cost it, you can put it out to tender.
Because the state needs to improve its capacity to deliver services.
We agree with that.
And to do it efficiently.
We agree with that,
cost-effectively.
but if the state does a cost-benefit analysis and finds that a private service will provide a better service at better cost, then I think that's what we should do.
It has never been seen. It has never happened, and it will never happen.
Wait for a DA government, and we'll see it.
Let's move on to the additional factors, if you like, of the need for the country to offer 24-hour clinics. Of course, because hospitals are already 24 hours, albeit they're so terrible at delivering their service. The EFF has been very vocal about the abolishment of the labor broking system. In fact, it's one of our core policy positions. And the desperate need to employ all workers directly, especially by the state. Part of this, and obviously the private sector, so part of this 24-hour clinic service at ground level must be implemented with healthcare professionals who are employed directly by the state. Why? Because of the insecurity that comes to, for instance, nurses who cannot guarantee their income and other benefits that nurses should be getting in order for them to deliver quality services for, our patients. This is very abusive, the, outsourcing of nursing staff, because it subjects the nurses to terrible conditions under the labor brokers, worsened by the terrible physical conditions, working conditions in the clinics and the hospitals themselves. So as should community healthcare workers, the porters, the cleaners, the security guards, the building maintenance people, who should be employed directly by the state.
Mandisa, you know that agency nurses in particular are used after hours, over weekends, at pressure points, because, you need extra people and people work different hours. So your very argument for 24-hour clinics, I think, is going to require that we have, agency nurses, because
I don't
part-time work.
understand on what grounds you would say that.
Well,
Jack.
typically existing in private sector, they get extra nurses over peak times, Friday nights, Saturday nights, Sunday nights.
I could relate to that in a case of of an emergency.
Of an emergency.
Let's say there was a disaster. I could relate to that. It's extremely practical.
Well,
then they would be covered
every
under
weekend is
temporary
almost
workers.
an emergency. You know, the casualty units over weekends are terrible. You
Well,
need
but
to
we both know why it's an emergency. It's because of sustained inefficiencies in the public health system. I mean, Tembisa Hospital, Chris Hani Baragwana.
I was at Tembisa
Charlotte
Hospital
Maxeke.
this morning, but I can tell you there is a role for nursing agencies at peak periods.
But it's not a new thing,
I
Jack,
think
that hospitals on Friday nights, on weekends, and over month ends.
It should be planned for.
Have increased intake.
It should be planned for, and I think that we should have the flexibility to decide what works best.
And it should be planned for within the capacity of the state, because we have seen provenly, the recent crisis at Charlotte Maxeke with maintenance, where the outsourced services, the maintenance workers are working, through an insourced, labor broking arrangement.
So when we build a new clinic, do you think the state should build the clinic, or do we go out
Of course
to
the
tender?
state should build a clinic.
Is the state capable of building a
clinic? You're taking
clinic?
me to a whole new topic. Under an uncorrupt government,
Uncorrupt, yes.
uncorrupt and uncorruptible as much as possible government, it's possible to have a state-owned construction company.
You really believe that?
The Department of Public
State.
Works is positioned currently to actually have a state-owned construction service. But you are moving away from our topic of public
You believe that
healthcare.
government can build a clinic, can build a hospital. I think that we need to have a proper tender system, no corruption, put it out to tender. You know
We'll
the problem.
never agree on the
We'll never
on
agree,
the tender
but
system.
I do not believe that there'll ever be a state-building company.
By its nature.
No, I think we can run a decent tender system, and we can get a hospital built on time.
Well, you're not
budget.
running a decent tender system in the Western Cape, from what I hear.
It's the best health system
in the Cape
country.
Metro, and recently you have the problems you have with Patricia de Lille, because you're trying to bring in.
Let's compare the Western
an Israeli
Cape,
company, but let's leave
Western
it at
Cape
that.
Health Department
This
is the best in the country.
As it happens, a special edition where politicians are trying their hand at being presenters. Coming up, your chance to engage directly with me and talk about issues facing this province of Gauteng and the country at large, as well as EFF policy. The number to call is 011-759-6340. Again, you can tweet me on at Mandisa Mashego or at eNCA. Please use the hashtag #AsItHappens.